My name's Hetty Hollyfield, and I'm on the board of WARP, and I'm here to acknowledge that we are not the first people on this land. The lands of Kent State University were the previous homes of people who were removed from this area without their consent by the colonial practices of the United States government. Before removal, these groups created networks that extended from Wyoming to the Florida coast and Appalachia and to the northern reaches of Lake Superior. These societies included peoples of the Shawnee, Seneca, Cayuga, Delaware, Wyandottes, Ottawa, and Miami. We honor their lives, both past and present, and strive to move beyond the remembrance toward reflection and responsibility through honest accounts of the past and the development of cultural knowledge and community. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So I have a little bit of a selfish reason for wanting Kent State to be the host of this conference. So I have two important mentors in my life, and Tina Jennings is one of them, and Janice Lessman-Moss are amazing individuals. I'm a teacher because of them. I hope to spend the rest of my years teaching, doing them justice. Both of them have been strong influences, have challenged their students, brought new ideas and perspectives. I will say at one point, Janice asked me, well, why did you leave this? And I might have shed one tear or two, going like, oh, I don't know. And then I realized after the fact, it's because she wanted me to be able to be strong enough to answer questions like that. Like, she knew why I wove this. I've been talking for weeks on end, and she's tired of hearing about it. But she wanted to make sure that all of her students can prove why important textiles and all the art form that this is. So she wanted to make sure that we were amazing at this. She's been part of the faculty at Kent State for 40 years and recently graduated. So we are so honored to have her here and share her perspective and her work. So this is she.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to speak at this wonderful conference. Thank you, Kelsey. Thank you, Kat. Lovely to hear that I made an impact in her life, and hopefully I did in many other students' lives. So thank you all for being here on a early Saturday, beautiful Saturday morning, right? Discovery, invention, as oftentimes necessitated by discovery, right? I added the invention to my topic, and dissemination, exchange and connection. Weaving is the ultimate connector, right? It is connect in terms of material, in terms of social, and I have been so lucky to find joy, challenges, beauty and meaning in my life through weaving. I think all of us in this room recognize, acknowledge, and take pride in the rich and diverse history of textiles and our place in that continuum. I think all of us have played the role of teacher, whether formally or informally, and take pleasure in sharing our passion for weaving with those who want to learn more about it. In my privileged position as an academic at Kent State, I had a context for doing all the things that I wanted to do. To make discoveries in my own woven artwork, both conceptually and technically, and to share that knowledge, skill, and enthusiasm with my students. I worked to create a stimulating studio environment at the university that would foster curiosity, creative inquiry, growth, exchange, along with mutual respect and passion for our field. A fertile environment for all of us to connect and continue exploring and learning together. In addition to the lively classroom, my responsibility as professor meant that I spend focused time on developing my personally motivated research in the privacy of my own studio. So I've composed a visual story of my journey as an artist, maker, and professor. It's mostly chronological, although not totally, to introduce you to the rich life I've lived over the past 40 years and demonstrate the true quality of connection that arose from a myriad of experiences in and out of the classroom. My visual story will also attest to the balancing act we all have to deal with, but in my role as an academic and an artist. And I know I probably included too many images, but I wanted to present the wealth of rich and varied experiences I've had. It's difficult to cram all of this into the brief time period that I've been given. So I did eliminate some details in my conversation, but hopefully those questions, any questions you have, will be able to be responded to during the question and after my presentation, question and answer after my presentation and John Paul's presentation. And also, final note is that many of the images that I had documented of my life at Kent State and my work pre-digital are not included in this presentation just because it's so much easier to include things that are digital, right? So more recent kinds of work. So I'm going to get started with our tour here. So when I first came to Kent in 1981, I didn't have a lot of weaving experience. I had not woven as a child. I was not into textiles as a child. I learned how to weave in college at Tyler School of Art in Temple University in Philadelphia. And I fell in love with the process. I think as so many of us just have that voila moment. When I came to Kent State, I had a lot to learn. I looked at a lot of things. I looked at the work of my peers. You see an image of the work of Sandra Brownlee Ramsdale, and this is a piece of mine. And I'm interested in the mechanics of the loom, the patterning that's created through the geometry of the intersection of the warp and the weft, that binary intersection. I'm interested in the methodical kind of way of working, but I'm also interested in creating a contrast to that through organic movement. So that center panel, the center part of that weaving is supplemental weft. I didn't know how to do that until I got to Kent State, and I learned how to do it here. I also incorporated those, I think they were coconut palm parts whenever I took the weaving off the loom and made a contrast to, again, that kind of mechanical aspect of patterning on the loom. Samantha Bittman was here not too long ago, and again, working with the students. I see Stephen Tornero's up there in the audience, and Stephen was part of that workshop. Jasmine Cornell, a sample from that workshop. So I have been so privileged to have this opportunity to work with all kinds of different artists throughout my experience at Kent State. And you know, one of the things that's so exciting about being a faculty, of course, is you want to learn as much as you can so you can share that information with your students. And I was in a position to invite people to come to Kent State who I wanted to learn from. And then the students learned as well as me, and I could transfer that information for the next 40 years, and they could take that home with them and apply it immediately. One of the things I wanted to bring up in the weavings that I'm showing you initially, that notion of invention. If you notice here in the center panel part of the weaving, there's a dowel rod that goes across the whole width, right? Most of you are weavers, or many of you are weavers, right? So you understand all the things. I hope that many of you are, because this is kind of geared towards people who have that kind of way of thinking. So the dowel rod is going across, but it's not weaving in the fabric at a certain point in the weaving. What happens, of course, there's all kinds of tension inconsistencies, right? So you can see the things that I'm interested in there, but it also is, whoopsie, well, you've got a little flash there of things that are happening. This is another piece that I had, and I want to show you in the next image how I build it on the loom. The dowel rods are not going across the whole weaving. This is the way I build it on the loom. I build this kind of skeleton and look at the weaving as kind of the skin, and the rods at this point were the bones. They are the rigid element in contrast to the organic kind of movement of the materiality of the weaving. I have some Bureau's knots here, and again, the rods are not weaving in throughout the weaving, the field. So that's what it looks like afterwards. The other image was what it looked like prior to it. So what do? I try everything, right? Many of you have probably been in this situation. So put the sticks in the back of the loom, hang weights off, and then I invented this tool.
And I had it built with a local machinist, John Steiner from Kent. And I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. So you can see at the back of the loom, when I was weaving, I was able to adapt or adjust the warp tension by the inch increments. So it did have its kind of parameters, but nonetheless, it was interesting to, I always feel like I'm such a loud talker anyway. But anyway, so that you know, the inconsistency then in terms of the back warp beam, look what happened. So I'm weaving another weaving, and I thought I had everything all resolved. I did not. I had every weight in the house that I possibly had. I ordered the fishing weights. I put them on the back of my loom, and of course, every time I released the tension to advance the warp, the loom started to tip over. So it was very dangerous work. So, you know, what do? Then I get a new loom, and I'm working with this, the notion of kind of circular time and linear time. And of course, weaving is documenting linear time in a real direct way, right? The accumulation of weft and warp, so documentation of linear time. But I'm also interested in circular time and that kind of connection of the two. But look at what I'm weaving with. So I'm weaving with little dowel rods and then yarn and all different kinds of tensions across the field. So I designed a new tool. Fortunately, I have a great machinist in town that is really willing to work with me. It was documented in the book Ideas in Weaving by Ann Sutton and Diane Sheehan. This is what the device looks like. It's up at Praxis now. I wanted to have this in for Chad so that he could put it into action. And that is what it looks like when I had the warp tied on initially. This is me adjusting the back beam, essentially. That's it at the end of the weaving. So the weaving that I just showed you, that's what the warp looked like in terms of the adaptation of the warp. So the tool was invaluable to me. And this weaving, although this is a tapestry weaving, you're going to see lots of different changes in my weavings. I was searching for my voice in textiles, and I was also really attempting to learn as much as I could for my own sake, for my own research, and also for the sake of the students. So there's a negative space, the negative spaces that go throughout the weaving. In the piece, it is otherwise weft space. And again, thinking about the circle, that spiral, that circular time. And I did a series of those weavings. They're called rhyme and reason, the combination of logic and imagination, or something that is more methodical, something is more calculated, and something that is more kind of serendipitous. I like that, you know, that's the way our life is, and I try to capture that in the essence of the textiles. The negative space in the weaving. In this instance, I decided to work with short pieces of rope and install those to create that curvilinear movement. Again, just to get another textural variation in the field. So we've got the wall. This, I hope you can kind of interpret this piece, because this is the wall here. It's open, and this is positive weaving, and then this is all positive weaving. But on the other hand, when I'm at school and I'm seeing all the things that the students are doing, oh my gosh, it's so exciting. And working with that idea of the intersection, the binary, the combination of the warp and the weft, and that notion of transparency, looking at historical models, which are so important for both me and the students. I always introduced history as a way for the students to kind of, again, connect to that continuum. Allison working on her weaving here with the gradient wefts. So I thought, well, I want to try working with that notion of transparency more, that optical mixing, that color blending that occurs through our process in a very distinctive way, which is very exciting to me. So this is comprised of all ropes in the weft, and the short pieces are dyed either yellow or kind of rust color. And then the warp is all ochre. And that central motif, which again, you'll see recurring. I look at weaving as being kind of almost a figure, kind of that center axis, spine of our body, kind of focusing the pattern into the central connector. Computers. And I know, you know, it's interesting talking to an audience of mature individuals like myself. All of us know life before computers, right? Whereas a young audience can't imagine life without computers. We did not always have them. So trying to seek ways to create that or design my weavings prior to weaving. How could you anticipate what you're going to get on the loom? I tried working with drawings and painting on one side and painting on the other side. One side was the warp, one side was the weft. That was okay. But when I discovered computers and realized that I could create that intersection of warp and weft through the simulation on the computer, was mind-boggling and very exciting. So I went on to create some weavings where I was actually painting on the warp, and the painting was responding to the discontinuous wefts that you'll see. You can see in the detail maybe a little bit more closely, the discontinuous weft color changes that occurred. So again, that contrast of kind of the organic pattern and something that is more methodical, more geometric. And that contrast was very interesting to me. This is how I painted them. So I would actually put the warp on the loom, unpainted, and I would weave a little kind of tack through the whole length of what I wanted to weave. I put a bar at the top and then I cut it off the loom. This warp actually has an E-cot involved in it too. So I had an E-cotted warp that I put on the loom. I wove my little kind of basting weft stitch through it. I took it off, I put it on the wall. Why do I put it on the wall? I mean, two reasons. I take it off the loom because if you've ever tried to rinse anything while it's on the loom, I mean, what do? You bring buckets into the room. You will see some people still do that. It's really backbreaking work, right? So, and it's also backbreaking to paint when you have to kind of lean over, right? And I was doing this when I was a lot younger, but I was still not crazy. So it was like putting it on the wall allowed me to kind of make those movements very easily. And I had the E-cot markers, and then I created the circles. And then I actually responded to that with this curvilinear kind of path. That was more serendipitous. I didn't plan that. I just kind of said, oh, okay, I'll try this way and that way and this way. I like those kinds of connections of different kinds of patterns, right? Patterns that are both really planned and really controlled, and patterns that just kind of happen, and how they come together to create a whole. So this piece is the result of that. And you'll notice in the detail that in the discontinuous wefts, I also have a little metal section. Do you see that little metal section on the edge there? Right here. So this series of weavings was the first time that I introduced metal into the weaving. And I wanted to have kind of markers within that kind of topography of pattern. And those, they do evolve from a central focus. My students, Hildur Ásgeirsdóttir Johnson, she is Icelandic. She goes by the name Johnson. She did when she was in school. Now she's using Ásgeirsdóttir, which I'm sorry if anybody knows how to speak Icelandic. I know I'm not speaking correctly, but nonetheless, she's an amazing student. She worked with warp and weft painting when she was a student. We worked on that in our pictorial class. And this is her work. She paints on the loom. That's a 10-foot wide loom. She then takes that loom over to her sink in the studio and rinses it. I don't know how she does it, but she does it. And she's amazing. And we got together, a group of us, alumni and current students, for her reception of her work in Cleveland a number of years ago, about 5 or 6 years ago, pre-pandemic, to celebrate her work. That is her weaving on the back wall. She's an amazing artist and is from Iceland. and works with images based in the landscape of Iceland. But we do a lot of painting at school. And this is an example of painting the warp. And I actually don't know if that is not the same weaving that she's painting here, and whether that's a warp or a weft painting, but we work a lot with that. You can see in this instance, Allie removed the warp from her loom. And Allie, in her senior or her graduate thesis work, she was all working with painting on the warp, but also working with ikat. So working with weft ikat and also working with warp ikat. And I am really interested in ikat because I like the way the pattern acknowledges kind of the axis of the loom, either the warp or the weft, or the warp and the weft, right? So this is one of our studios. It's not our current studio, but one of the studios that we worked in Lake Olson Hall. And you can see the students exploring ikat. There's Kat and Aoife. We had a workshop. So, I mean, you know, the notion, we are part of this amazing continuum of technique and love of textiles. And there's so much that's been done that we can love and appreciate in history. And when Shinami Ricketts came, she was working with a historic textile, the technique of ikat. She's Japanese. She knows how to do it right from a perspective of history. And she taught my students how to do it correctly. And I love the fact that they were able to enjoy working with something that was much more kind of had a historical root. But I like to adapt that tradition. And here's an adaptation, which I call the pulled or shifted warp. So this is a checkerboard ikat. This is how the back beam essentially is adapted, or the back apron bar, to accommodate a shift. So this is a traditional Japanese process, but of course, if anybody knows that, and I think who was at the workshop in Japan yesterday was talking with students, the idea of shifting the warp is ancient, but how can we do it easily with our what we have available to us, the tools we have available? So working with that canvas that is attached to our back apron bar, and as the warp then begins to go back in the loom, and then it shifts. And this is one of the shifted ikat pieces that I did. This is a double layer ikat. It is a warp rep weaving. It is done on a CompuDobby, which is a praxis. It's a 72-inch wide make-homer loom. A combination of silk and linen in the warps. One layer is silk, one layer is linen. And that patterning system, again, the beauty of the geometry of the circle within the square, and then the shifting, kind of that dynamic movement of the shift, was something that was really exciting to me. But also, regular ikat's exciting to me too. And this is, again, a warp rep weaving done on a 24 shaft arm loom, Dobby, computer Dobby arm loom. And it incorporates in the weft, I guess I didn't say in the previous one, but those little, the wefts are little pieces of nylon. Robin Holler, one of my former students who teaches now at ECU, is professor of art there at East Carolina University. Would come back and work on our loom, the TC1 loom, before they got a TC2 at East Carolina. And here she is with an ikat. She's an ikat crazy person. So she always puts ikats in all of her work. And this is one of her pieces. And that it's not the one that she's weaving, but nonetheless, I love the image of her with that warp in action. The history of textiles is, of course, amazing and vast, and always looking at historic textiles and trying to encourage the students to do the same. The circle within history has wonderful kind of symbolic references. And also I've read, of course, that the notion of using the circle was a challenge to weavers. It's the hardest thing to do, right? So, I'm going to try weaving circles. And so I don't know what is accurate but we all like our challenges, right? And if you are really interested in that relationship of the curvilinear, then of course you need to do circles. We would go to see the presentations at meet with our curator of textiles and Islamic art, Louise Mackey, Dr. Louise Mackey. She's no longer there. There is no longer, you guys went to the museum yesterday, right? There is no longer currently at the Cleveland Museum of Art a curator of textiles, which is a really shame because we have an amazing collection, right? And when Louise retired, I was very concerned about what would happen, and I'm still concerned about what will happen. But nonetheless, it was wonderful for us to be able to go behind the scenes. We would do that once a year. The circle, something that I'm so interested in. This is the warp rep weaving again, with probably silk on one layer and linen on the other. Maybe it isn't, maybe it's both linen, but nonetheless, they're painted circles on both layers. I like the atmospheric kind of quality of the painting and the way that contrasts with the concrete quality of the mechanical pattern of the loom. Then digital technology or digital jacquard arrived, right? Jacquard technology became accessible to hand weavers in the late, maybe probably 1990s. And as soon as I started reading about it, I was excited about exposing our students to this new technology. So the single thread control loom created by Digital Weaving Norway was an amazing tool. And I put in a request at the university to have them purchase this loom for me. And of course, they didn't. It was a very expensive loom. It was $60,000. And so nobody has a budget for that. The School of Fashion had a budget for technology. I'm not in the School of Fashion, but the director at the time, Dr. Elizabeth Rhodes, would ask me, okay, Janice, what do you need in terms of technology? I said, okay, I want this $60,000 digital loom. Right. And she said, okay, well, I'll put you at the bottom of the list because you can't kind of go to the top. You're not a fashion faculty. And I said, sure, I understand. So I did this for years and years and years. And she called me one May and said, order the loom. And I was shocked, panicked, and excited. I didn't know how to use it. And I didn't know anything about jacquard or single thread control. So it was a little bit of a awakening. But fortunately, the Jacquard Center opened that summer. So I was able to learn how to work with digital jacquard. And it changed my life. It changed the life of my students. It's changed all of our lives, really, because of the way we're able to use this technology in a very different way. This is the first weaving that I did on the loom after we purchased it. And it was, I put a e-cut warp on it because I wanted to, again, acknowledge the axis. And of course, I couldn't just weave. So I had to put something dyed on there. And then working with the different scales of patterns, I'm interested in the small scale of the intersection of warp and weft, right? That's our smallest cell of pattern. And that expands with the twills and the diamond twills. And then of course, all the gestures or other patterns that I create through digital technology, the designing, and they all come together. How much? 5 minutes left? Oh my God. Okay, well, sorry guys, we're gonna really not see most of this presentation, but nonetheless, here I am weaving. I knew this would happen. I get so nervous because I can't fit it all in.
I'm going to interrupt and just say that we do have a 30-minute break after this, so we have some wiggle room. I think.
Okay, so if everybody doesn't mind losing a little bit of that break, okay, thank you. I will speed up. It really is very difficult. I have so much I want to tell you guys, and I don't want to belabor any of these points, but I'm hoping that you're interested. So I will kind of move through a little bit more quickly. This was an industrial weaving that I did. It's on a triple layer warp that was on a loom. When I started to learn how to work with jacquard, I worked at the Jacquard Center, and that was, we had the opportunity to go into the mill and weave. This is my weaving on a mill, a loom at the mill, a power loom. And this is a damask weave insofar as it's only one layer, but I have a black weft and a white warp. I took the students down to the mill several years when the mill would allow us access. You can see me standing there, and the students were just as pleased as punch to be able to see their weavings come off the loom. And we still do mill weaving every year. Well, we still did before I graduated. And it seems like just 10 minutes ago, but we would design weavings in our jacquard class, and we would weave, we'd send them off to the mill, and voila. I mean, it is like Christmas. And if you haven't done anything industrially, and I know some of you may be designers, but this isn't the same kind of pressure. It's like having fun. And you make a design you send it off to the mill, it comes back, it's woven. We are using warp tapestry. This is a warp tapestry example by one of my students. This is one of my examples of a warp tapestry. The complexity of this patterns with the layers that you can achieve in the computer is amazing. And you can see kind of the moire effect that I'm getting through the layers of patterning. This is a very large piece. And it has that felt surround, and that felt surround was made with the assistance of Lauren Mangieri, one of my former students. And she would do all the layout. I'd dye the wool. She would do the laying out, do the kind of the hard labor of bending over and laying out the wool. And then she and I would get together and we would felt the weaving. And you can see in the bottom right that is the finished panel. And it's just, it's that little halo, that little surround that I'm interested in, but it has to be a complete felt that's at the back of the weaving. Another piece of jacquard, you can see I have the little nylon weft ropes that are inserted in the field, that field of pattern, but that field of pattern has a central focus. You can see here how the layers, these are layers that come together. That's the simulation of the weaving, and that's the actual weaving. So all these layers play a role at one time or another. These are structural, this is structural. And again, you can see how that defines the center. So even though it seems like an overall field of pattern, there is a center that is always acknowledged in my work. I want to kind of contain that infinite quality of patterning that is always present with pattern, right? Pattern goes on forever. So how do you harness that? How do you contain that? The students working with jacquard weaving for their trying to find their own voice. I'm very encouraging of students kind of doing what they want to do to fulfill their ideas. And these were two examples of fashion students working on fabric for their BFA shows. Learning from, again, visiting artists is amazing for me. I learned so much, the students learned so much. That piece on the right-hand side is a weaving done by an amazing weaver, former student Lori Addis. Extract number 1 is done on our small TC1 loom. Every semester we would have an open studio, pre-pandemic. And my students would be the ambassadors for the studio, and they would do demonstrations of dyeing, of weaving, of felting, of printing. And we would invite students primarily from the School of Fashion, initiated by our fashion fabrics faculty like Kat. And it was really very exciting to introduce students who were totally unfamiliar with the potentials of textiles, what they could do. One of the wonderful things about working with the TC1 loom, the thread control loom, the personal jacquard, is that you can combine that hand and the digital. So I can make things on this loom using whatever materials I want, using whatever kinds of techniques I want. I don't have the parameters that one would encounter at a commercial, at a mill with an industrial jacquard loom. So this is a piece that I did introducing the notion of the random walk, the shifted weft, which I have taught in my classes. I love the idea of the shifted weft. I had never done it. It's like, okay, great. I was the first visiting artist at Digital Weaving Norway. I was looking to purchase a loom for myself, and I tried working with the random walk. Random walk which is based in a mathematical theory that is, what does it do? It is about nature. It connects with nature and the prediction of things that happen in your life. And it also kind of the notion of the random walk relates to me in my walking. And these are some student examples of working with essentially the shifted weft. Connor over there is working with a shifted or pulled warp in addition to the shifted weft. And this is me tying the shifted weft to create some complexity in my weavings. I'm working with two systems of weft. One is white and blue and one is black and blue. And this is a weaving that results. Again, the central focus, concave, convex, kind of thinking about circular time, linear time, breath, in, out, the finite, the infinite. This is the back of the weaving. So you can see the shift in my weaving a little bit more apparently. It's there all the time. And, you know, if you don't have the shift, the weaving is totally different. I love that organic kind of unpredictable movement in relation to all of the pre-designed aspects of my work. Being in the studio, being energized by the students, kind of being observing their kind of collaborative efforts, their work is always inspiring to me. So even though I'm juggling teaching with making, I'm enjoying and learning from my students, watching them work, seeing them think about what they're doing, working on painted warp. That's a painted weft over there, done by Megan. And there's me painting in my studio. So this is what my studio looks like. And I'm working on a painted warp. I work on the painted warp in a length so that I can paint. You see the blue marks there. So I have one kind of color there and one kind of color up a little higher. The sections allow me also to paint in smaller sections this way. So I can do one here, another color here, another color here. And you'll see then I can do some smaller weavings across the width of my loom. I now have a small loom in addition to my large loom. I'm very fortunate. I don't drive, except, well, I do drive, but I don't have a car. I share a car with my husband, and I've always walked. So I've saved a lot of money over the years on gas and cars. And I felt like, okay, I can buy looms. So I did. And this is a picture in my studio of a small loom. Small looms, small weavings are so exciting because they allow you to kind of really explore things without a lot of preciousness. The atmospheric quality of the painted warp really contrasts very nicely with the kind of the more concrete graphic aspects of the weft insertions in this weaving. Weavings are always better in person, right? You need to see them physically in front of you to really appreciate the tactility, the dimensionality, the sculptural relief of the surface, particularly when you're integrating waffle weave into your structure. This is silk warp, linen weft, which most of my weavings are. So you already have that shine, that contrast of texture. And then the structures create another level of texture that is really amazing. Taking my method of working, patterning, and creating landscape work when I was a resident artist at the Icelandic Textile Center in 2018. The reintroduction of metal. Remember, we saw those at the beginning or near the beginning, those metal inserts. I hadn't ever done it in my jacquard. I was talking to a friend and she said, well, why don't you put your metal inserts in? You can do that. And I said, oh, yeah, you're right. I hadn't really thought about it. And she thought that I should just do it. And I did. That brings me to a little bit of a diversion here, but the notion of working with different types of materials. Weavers are the most resourceful individuals anywhere, right? We work with what is available in terms of being resourceful, using ubiquitous material, paper, plastic, magazine paper, historically leaves, branches, whatever. I love that. And I always insisted that my students work with recycled materials. And so I had to do some myself. This is magazine paper that I've kind of twisted, and you can see a shifted warp on the loom. Plastic, magazine paper. This is one of my students, former students, Lauren Mangieri. using plastic bags. And these are, you can see the size. This is actually very, very large. This is drawings. This was a female student who took all of her drawings, cut them up, and kind of was creating this Picasso-esque drawing from her weavings, a kind of, you know, a comment on male, female, and gender roles and fame and all that stuff. Joanne Arnett, who teaches now in the School of Fashion, this is from her thesis show, working with wire. I love the elusiveness of wire, and you can see her standing in front of her pieces there, and how the image really, you know, kind of is very fleeting. All of these artists are just amazing, and, you know, look them up if you're interested in finding out more about what they're doing now. Erin Miller was interested in working with phosphorescent yarn. It was too expensive to order from China, and she had to order too much, so she painted her phosphorescent yarn. And this is all about nightmares. So in the daytime, the image is not apparent, and then in the nighttime, this scary image comes up. So more of my pieces. This is a recent commission that I did since I graduated in the fall. My husband is a musician and an artist, and he has a studio next to mine. We, you know, music and art have many analogies, weaving in particular, with that notion of repetition and rhythm and accumulation. So he's been a great inspiration to me. We are, you know, so close in terms of proximity of studios, and we share a lot of mutual interests, and we talk a lot about art. So whenever these pieces were made during lockdown, and inspired by a song that my husband was writing, Dancing with the Distance. These medallions here, they look dark, right? But they are actually metal. So again, that kind of fleeting aspect of metal. Microphone's on. Yeah, what do we do? But the
Batteries probably out.
I'll just talk loudly. Is that okay for the, okay, because I'm a loudspeaker, right? The pieces here are again in that series. I was fortunate enough to buy a small loom prior to the lockdown, and so I was able to work on small weavings. Also, my palette kind of changed during lockdown, and my approach to my work did somewhat, just because of my walks. I wasn't walking to and from school anymore. I was able to walk on a path in the woods. And so thinking about that kind of shade and being surrounded by trees, it really impacted the way I thought about color and also landscape. So these paths, these very serpentine kind of lines of paths in combination with the geometry of the loom patterns, it's just that complexity, that notion of combining lots of different kinds of patterns together to create a very interesting field. Another piece from that series, you notice the other one was called Path Sunlight. This is Path's Moonlight. When I was invited to have an exhibition at the Kent State University Museum, right in my last year teaching, I kind of went for it, and I made this large piece, which generally we don't make large pieces, right? Because it's too hard to store them, and you don't have any place to look at them. Anyway, I did. This is metal in the center. Doesn't it look white? And the students kind of thought it was white. It looks white from certain angles, which is why in this image, I documented it from different angles and with different lighting, so that you can understand kind of ephemeral nature of the metal and the role that plays in the viewing of the piece, how it engages the viewer differently in kind of moving around the piece so they can experience that kind of change of light, something that I experience all the time when I'm out on my walks. The back of the weaving, that's the way I weave it, upside down. I'm not excited about weaving upside down, but that's what I have to do. So this is the reverse of my weaving. Fortunately for digital cameras, I'm able to kind of stick that under the warp and document things as they move along. Therefore, I can kind of check and make sure I'm doing okay. I have thoroughly enjoyed every moment of my teaching career. I loved working with the students, being with them, sharing my knowledge through demonstrations, through lecturing, inviting them to look more closely, to be more curious, to be more critical in their evaluations of all kinds of textiles. I love working with the students independently, talking to them about techniques, talking to them about their ideas. Brought me great joy and great fulfillment. Of course, looking at the work is also something that I was very excited about as I was a professor. I am continuing to work on my own practice. This is a simulation of a weaving that I'm just finished. It's not installed yet. It is going to the USONA Institute in Michigan. And that's the piece on my floor. It is 10 feet wide by 14 feet. So it's really difficult to document and you don't get a sense of the scale, but it's a big piece. It takes up my entire floor and I can't get it all into my camera. But nonetheless, I'm very excited to have that installed, hopefully sometime soon. And thank you.
All right, thank you all for being so kind and patient. We're really excited to be able to have all this variety of people in person and virtual, and to record all of these wonderful talks. So again, I'm very selfish here. I am a huge fan of John Paul Morabito, so I mean, this is going to be a fabulous day. They have presented internationally. They are an interdisciplinary weaver who engages queerness, ethnicity, and the sacred through the medium of tapestry reimagined in the digital age. Their work outputs woven forms, moving images, and relational actions that look toward a future past horizon where one can exalt queer grace. So without further ado, this is John Paul Morabito.
All right, so just to begin, I want to make an acknowledgement of epistemology. Weaving, as it is taught and discussed within the United States Academy, is inextricably bound to a modernist legacy that looked beyond the Western Hemisphere to develop its vocabularies. Foundational figures such as Ani Albers, Ed Rosbach, Sheila Hicks, and Lenore Tawney drew upon knowledge unearthed from pre-Columbian, Andean, and Mesoamerican textiles. These textiles are material manifestations of living indigenous epistemologies that continue to persist through colonialism. We must not only acknowledge what it means for us to engage these originary epistemes, but also consider what it means for us to engage them. So I am assistant professor and head of textiles here in the School of Art at Kent State University. As more and more fiber programs have been closing, Kent State stands amongst a small cohort where students can pursue the study of textiles within the context of a publicly funded research university. My predecessor, the incredible Janice Lessman-Moss, began her tenure here in 1981 and led the program for 40 years. Under her leadership, Kent built a robust weaving area and was one of the first programs in the United States to develop a jacquard curriculum. Jacquard weaving continues to be one of the central components of our program. We offer coursework in weaving, off-loom pursuits, felt making, dye, and print. Our program is distinguished by a rigorous weaving curriculum that is structured horizontally to support entry into weaving topics courses, which are focused on conceptual and formal questions in color, imagery and abstraction, complex drafting, and dimensionality. This is expanded with an emphasis on transdisciplinary and pollinary approaches that push weaving and textiles more broadly beyond the binary. As a publicly funded Research One university, we are able to offer strong resources for our graduate program. The MFA in Studio is now fully funded and comes with an annual stipend. Further, there is significant funding to support graduate research. Students are able to submit proposals to the Graduate Student Senate for research funding. Graduate students are admitted into the textiles program as graduate teaching assistants, where they perform departmental service and teach introductory courses as instructors of record. Teaching is a core component of our program, and we provide significant mentorship. Our students are able to have hands-on experience with instruction and curricular development through a collaborative relationship with supervising faculty. The Textiles program is distinguished by a transdisciplinary approach that fosters conceptual vision, technical facility, and formal sensitivity. The curriculum emphasizes the position of textiles within a contemporary art landscape and is supported by evolving theoretical discourse. Students engage contemporary and global histories of textiles through a decolonial, feminist, and queer lens. Making and meaning are engaged as interdependent elements of studio production. Consideration of the distinctive properties and processes of textiles, such as repetition, geometry, line, color, pliability, and embodiment, engenders a rigorous vocabulary to support formal and conceptual inquiry. Students explore thinking and working with age-old hand processes while incorporating digitally interfaced approaches to making. Individual and collective studio practice is contextualized through the study of histories, political meanings, and social themes that are deeply interwoven into the discipline of textiles. In the studio as classroom, we are developing a fluency which allows students to transgress boundaries. And embodied skill-based knowledge fosters an innate curiosity in regard to form and content. Accordingly, workshops are rigorously structured to engender an understanding of digital and physical matter. As making and meaning are inseparable, reading and discussion have alongside studio activity. Vocabularies are developed and expanded through the study of complex textile constructions and dye processes, alongside the integration of handwork and digital tools. Through their making, our students engage rigorous conceptual questions in abstraction, figuration, sculptural form, spatial intervention, and performative action. Together, we are blurring the boundaries between textiles, painting, sculpture, architecture, technology, and language. This work considers the practice of weaving and textiles more broadly as an expansive playground to complicate the paradigms of contemporary art with textility. I teach from my position as an artist, but not necessarily from my art practice. This distinction is an important one. I want my students to have the freedom and tools to follow their own curiosity, to ask questions that lead them to unexpected places, to develop the ability to be critical of themselves and the world around them, and to grow into artists and cultural workers according to who they are and what they value. It is my hope that they build the foundations of independence. Teaching is itself a form of cultural activism and creative change. I understand this as a social practice where the construction of meaning is engaged through a relational learning community that co-creates knowledge. In this way, my pedagogical work engenders the creation of meaning and cultural change in an entirely different way than my art making, and as such, it is inextricably bound to my practice as an artist. With sincere blasphemy, I employ the fallen glory of tapestry to reorient the holy image within queer cosmology. My materials, cotton wool, synthetic gold, glass beads, and digital matter, are at once exquisite and contrived, further reflecting the resolute tensions between queerness, ethnicity, and the sacred. New worlds are imagined where no resolutions can be made. I am defiantly a weaver. Through this position, I reconsider tapestry as a modality in which image, matter, technology, and embodiment provide productive conflicts for constructing form. Drag, in all its bombastic and glittering glory, is a guiding sensibility which I engage to decadently retrace and undo faith, history, and legacy. Here, I employ digital interfaces in concert with improvisational handwork to mutate relics, icons, and ritual matter into opulent woven memorials that twist time. This temporal folding is further explored by drawing live weaving into videos and performances that approach time-based media through the linear logic of the loom. The resulting objects, videos, and performances are unbound from chrononormativity to rest uncomfortably within queer temporality. Released from the tyranny of the present, my work looks toward a future past horizon where one can exalt a queer apotheosis. As a form, Tapestry provides social meaning through its location as adjacent to but outside of art. This liminal positionality situates the medium as a tangent ripe with queer potential. Linguistically, tangents are divergent ideas that spring out from one line of thought to follow their own direction. Tangents are deviations, tangents are disruptions, tangents are queer. Working from this orientation, the tangent becomes a queer methodology through which I craft horizontal connections between weaving and the larger history of art. Touching but not intersecting prior forms, my tapestries are tangents that become something entirely of their own while remaining emphatically weaving. Here, my stubborn devotion to the loom is deliberate and political. I approach making through a focused, polyamorous weaving praxis that encompasses myriad perspectives within a singular methodology. Weaving is the holism. I imagine this as a radical specificity in which focus offers expansive vision. Such oxymoronic positioning creates a queer understanding of the weaver's practice. It is promiscuous in its loyalty to the loom. My ontological work in tapestry transcends a mere queering of Catholicism to imagine queer memorials, queer mourning, and queer grace. Queerness, as Jose Esteban Munoz describes, is a horizon beyond the here and now. With glittering beads and brilliantly dyed threads, I reach for the queer horizon and abstract toward the impossibility of the queer divine. Ecstatically decadent, this saturated color and sparkle become glimmers of a shimmering gown, flashing lights on a dance floor, and the beat of disco, all hallmarks of queer ecstasy and resistance. This is more than campy queer sensibility. Our survival and our resistance happen in this space where joy and sorrow meet. It is what I am moving toward, and like the horizon, it is forever just beyond my reach. Rather than offering an exploration of a breadth of practice, today I'm going to focus on sitting in depth with a single body of work. The following paper considers ecstatic queer visuality, an analysis of the AIDS crisis, and love and gratitude and love again. Quote, "Don't be afraid of the clocks. They are our time. Time has been so generous to us. We imprinted time with the sweet taste of victory. We conquered fate by meeting at a certain time, in a certain space. We are a product of the time. Therefore, we give back credit where it is due. Time. We are synchronized now and forever. I love you." End quote. A letter from Felix Gonzalez Torres, written to Ross Laycock in 1988. This is a haunting. Carla Frequero considers haunting as an anachronistic model for the procession of queer history that stands as an alternative to hetero-reproductive and chrononormative futurity. With haunting, the past is materialized in the present as a being that is no longer and is not yet. Thus, the borderline between then and now wavers, reminding us that the past and the present are neither the discrete nor sequential. In the words of Wendy Brown, quote, "We inherit not what really happened, but what lives on from that happening, what is conjured from it, how past generations and events occupy the force fields of the present, how they claim us, and how they haunt, plague, and inspirit our imaginations and visions for the future." End quote. The past 4 decades have prepared queer people for this moment. In the face of a virus, we sacrificed and cared for one another. We never lost sight of pleasure, even when both the present and the future seemed impossible. Put another way, we fought for all this shit already. And yet, here we are again. The world was remade on March 11th, 2020. The World Health Organization officially declared the COVID-19 pandemic. Response to this emergency in the United States has been quite plainly abysmal. Willful negligence from an administration led by a despotic reality television star attempting to hold onto power politicized the pandemic. Marginalized communities, particularly those of color, have paid the price for his recklessness. At the time of this writing, 1,651,473 people have died in the United States, far more than any other country in the world. Although vaccination and medical treatments have changed our relationship to the virus and the manner through which it shapes our lives, people continue to die. 6,804,491 lives lost in 3 years. The fear, the deaths, the failed government response, all of this recalls another time of plague, led by indifference, emotional callousness, and greed for political power. Ronald Reagan, another egregiously unqualified celebrity who crowned himself president, willfully ignored the AIDS crisis. Although the term was introduced in 1982, Reagan did not publicly mention the word AIDS until 1985 and did not address the health crisis in a speech until 1987. In a calculated effort to maintain his own political influence, Reagan aligned himself with homophobic media that promoted the idea that AIDS was a punishment from God. Queer pleasure has long been stigmatized, and the associated heteronormative disciplining discourses were further reified during the AIDS crisis, when infection became associated with homosexuality, promiscuity, and drug use. Those associations persist, and the costs have been deadly. By 2002, the cumulative known deaths from AIDS-related complications reached 501,669 people in the United States alone. As a matter of perspective, the demographics for the LGBTQ+ community range from 1.2 to 4.5% of the total US population. Given this, the impact of AIDS upon the queer community has been nothing short of a genocide. Quote, "It would be difficult in the extreme to exaggerate the significance of the impact of HIV on the lives and identities of gay men around the world, the extraordinary uncertainty and complexity and determination to which it leads us as individuals facing a frankly appalling reality. In this respect, we are not like other people. In these circumstances, we feel that we owe one another a terrible loyalty, to borrow from Tennyson. Without marriage and its attendant rituals and institutions, gay men's most intimate and important relationships are frequently misunderstood and undervalued by heterosexuals who simply cannot understand what one is actually saying when one tells them that a friend is sick or a friend has died. When old friends of mine die now, I eventually come to picture them quite easily, seated on clouds in some heaven designed by Pierre-Gilles, talking, laughing, having sex. This is not denial. We know they're dead. We also know we have to continue to fight on behalf of the living," end quote. Much has changed since Simon Watney wrote these words in 1994. Notably, the umbrella of gay identity has been rearticulated to encompass cis male, trans, and non-binary bodies. Marriage equality, although continually contested, became law in the United States in 2015. In recent years, medical treatment has advanced to change a mass death experience to one of chronic mass infection. This too is changing with PrEP medications. Yet for those of us who came after the plague and before the pill, the ghost will never leave. On this, Joseph Osmundson, a queer writer and microbiologist who, like me, is of the generation of queers born into a plague, crafts a socially engaged virology that speaks to the far-reaching psychic and embodied impact of this dark inheritance. Quote, "HIV didn't just kill bodies, it killed a type of sex as well, a type of pleasure. It erased the possibility of my body and another meeting for a moment without my mortality there too, watching. Sex is this, another body, my death, all naked for all to see. I knew about HIV and death before I was gay. I knew that being gay might be deadly, and now I sleep with men. HIV has never left me. I'm nostalgic for the pre-HIV era I never knew," end quote. HIV and AIDS produce an ever-present haunting in the lives of queer people that defines our relationships with one another and with our own bodies, and coloring how or if we imagine a future. This haunting is not a return to the past, but rather a reckoning with what we have lost but never had. It is a demand to act and a demand to mourn. But how do you mourn an unfathomable loss? I have been immured completely by the ghost of Felix Gonzalez Torres. Thus I find myself compelled to retrace his movements by my own, rearticulating his beaded curtains through the embodied medium of craft. Bell Hooks has described Gonzalez Torres' work as a pedagogy of mourning, and I have become a disciple. I began following this direction in the spring of 2020 while under quarantine with the rest of the world. The terror of the AIDS crisis had come alive again, and it completely reoriented my studio. I completed the first of my responding tapestries a few months after turning 38, the same age González Torres was when a plague claimed his life. This witchy queer folding of time brought a ghost into me with the powerful invitation to remake the past in the present. I'm not recreating the work of Felix González Torres. The beaded curtains already exist and hold a place of meaning in the world. Rather, my retracing can be understood as a tangent that originates from the beaded curtains and then moves outward from there. My tangent, for Felix, takes the form of shivering beaded tapestries that confront the ghost of AIDS. These glittering tapestries manifest queer joy to proclaim that we are here and we sparkle. In this series, brightly patterned handwoven textiles are removed from the loom before they are complete, leaving lengths of unwoven warps that are threaded with glass beads. For Felix realizes an aesthetic of splendor and dilapidation, where decadently beaded sections are juxtaposed with raw threads to produce visual decay. Saturated color, sparkle, and visceral presence reorient these reflections of the past toward queer futurity. The tapestries enact queer form by focusing on the unwoven fringe rather than the body of the weaving. Occupying the space between tapestry and wall, the beaded fringe dangles in a state of liminality that is neither fully included nor separate from the textile. It is the queerest element of the weaving. From this orientation, for Felix is a border that retraces the beaded curtains of Felix González Torres and their location in the passageways between one place and another. The beaded curtain works incorporate industrially fabricated strands of beads that are fit into a multitude of spaces. Sets of instructions identify the color, size, and shapes of the beads and direct their installation. Presenting institutions are thus able to locally source the materials and customize the installation to a specific site, thereby facilitating participation for many, many people. In contrast, my works are painstakingly beaded by hand, yielding singular objects that inflect meaning through embodied visuality rather than participation. It is an effort to say something urgent in the slowest means possible. This tempo resists the frenetic pace of contemporary life while situating the work in the context of the aftermath. Hand beading, the essential gesture of this work, invokes body prayer and ritualistic petitions for miracles. In the Catholic tradition, a novena is a ritual of the rosary, where the prayer is performed for 9 successive days, or weeks, or months, as a plea for grace and miraculous intervention. As with any prayer of the rosary, object and gesture are tandem occurrences. The devotions are spoken and counted as faithful fingers pass the continuous circle of beads between them. Facing this devotional connection, I am performing a material novena uttered bead by bead through tapestries that queer the ancient Catholic prayer into a plea for queer salvation. Yet, my novena will not end at 9. Can there ever be enough to grace a people disavowed by God with a divine miracle? During the horror that was the AIDS crisis, Felix González Torres seeded Catholic ritual with seduction of queer desire transmuted through an aesthetic of disappearance. With the spills, participants kneel down and take shiny cellophane-wrapped candies, unwrap them, and place them in their mouths. The works are potent metaphors for oral sex. One must actively suck on the hard candies to release their bittersweet flavor and soft clotted center. This presents an erotic queering. There we go. Okay. This presents an erotic queering of the sacrament of Holy Communion, where a public comprised of believers and non-believers representing a multitude of genders and sexual orientations, races, and ages take a new democratic form of communion by ingesting the dying other. The queer body is likened to the body of Christ and thus becomes a divine body. This depletion of the spills is a ritual of transubstantiation, where mortal matter is vanished into the eternal and beyond. With ideal forms based on the combined weight of Gonzalez Torres and Ross Laycock, the candies are replenished to manifest the endless renewal found in divine grace. However, the Catholic mythos of resurrection is canceled. The body is not reborn when the cycle commences. Robert Storr argues that instead the body is abstracted so that it may die again and again and again and again, ceaselessly rehearsing not one death or two, not just Laycock's or Gonzalez Torres's, but many, many, many more. And there were many, many, many more. Renata Lorenz notes that Gonzalez Torres' elegiac forms reproduce embodiment without bodies. This absence of the body of Laycock or Gonzalez Torres, of gay men, of people with HIV and AIDS, it denies voyeurism by refusing to participate in the representation economy. Here, abstraction and opacity are strategies of ambiguity that connote rather than invoke identity. In transcending representation, Gonzalez Torres' works are less concerned with what a body is and more with what a body can do. The relational nature of this focus positions queer embodiment as a medium to suggest that our bodies do not end at our skin. This is exemplified by the beaded curtain works, which, occupying points of transition, require visitors to pass through their shimmering surfaces. Breaking through these beaded walls offers an erotic, pleasurable, and playful experience. But there are other associations of passing through a curtain to consider. As an imagined veil between life and death, the beaded curtains invite us to recognize our own fragility and contingency. Taylor Worley has suggested that the beaded curtain works are an emotional contagion that infects us with empathy. Through their ambiguity, Gonzalez Torres is able to harness that empathy with a powerful and effective weapon of opposition. In a conversation with artist Ross Bleckner, Gonzalez Torres explained the potency of this ambiguity. Quote, "What I'm trying to say is that we cannot give the powers that be what they want, what they expect from us. Some homophobic senator is going to have a very hard time trying to explain to his constituency that my work is homoerotic or pornographic. But if I were to do a performance with HIV blood, that's what he wants. That's what the rags expect because they can sensationalize that, and that's what's disappointing." End quote. Through the mundanity of his materials, Gonzalez Torres spun grace and desire into a single inseparable form, redirecting the essential carnality of Catholicism into coded representations that merge the personal body and the body politic. I see his work as a queer and ethnic tangent in which Catholic sensibilities are manifested and refused within conceptual art strategies. As a queer Catholic artist working a generation later, my weaving acts as an anachronistic adjacency that pulled sensibilities of queer conceptual art into the realm of craft. Engaging this pathway, I am threading horizontal connections between conceptual art and textile making. Drawing upon legacies of queer loss, Felix responds to immediate politics while placing weaving in direct conversation with the larger concerns of contemporary art. Felix works through transtemporal drag, a mode described by Renata Lorenz, which designates embodiment through chronopolitics that interrupts his heteronormative concepts of time. Here, I'm using the term drag with an intentional awareness of the associations with queer nightclubs, performativity, pageantry, and gender play. Materializing this transtemporal drag, Felix produces an anachronistic simultaneity that connects the COVID-19 and AIDS crises. Today, as we navigate a global pandemic, the time of AIDS has come again. I feel this in my body. I write these words as a queer person born during the early years of AIDS. Although I was too young to have been on the front lines, I came of age and into my own queerness in the shadow of the plague. My first relationship was with an HIV positive man, and my story is not unique. HIV is not exclusively a queer disease. However, infections are so overwhelmingly concentrated in our community that we regularly trade medical histories on first dates. We lost a generation to AIDS, and 40 years later, the epidemic has yet to end. Once again, the words of Joseph Altsmanson, quote, "The world is never the same after a plague. Maybe because there is so rarely a true after, there is a trauma to deal with. The black garbage bags that queers just a few years older than me were shoved inside, even as we still live with the fact of HIV still on our planet, end quote. This work is not about the pandemic of 2020. Rather, COVID-19 summoned the ghost of AIDS, a presence that never left. Today, I'm turning to face it. My responding beaded tapestries function as a material love letter and memorial to my queer ancestors who should still be here as elders. These glittering forms sparkle with grief and a reminder that queer resistance happens in the space where joy and sorrow meet. Imagine for a moment a lip-sync drag performance in the Queen, resplendent in her glittering regalia. Every movement, every parodic curve of her painted lips, and every glittering flash of sparkle emanate heartbreaking bliss. For Felix emerges out of this very sensibility to proclaim in the face of ostracization, persecution, and state-sanctioned illness that we continue to shine. And Felix, I loved you since I first heard your name. Thank you for everything. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. We do have a little bit of time if you'd like to ask some questions of these individuals. All right, do we have any questions in the audience? I have 2 microphones.
I want to ask John Paul a question. I don't know. I don't know if I need a microphone, but your work is amazing. That was a beautiful presentation. But I you know, and looking at them, really, I have not seen them live. A body of the work. I've seen one of his pieces in a faculty exhibition this year. And seeing the body of work is simply amazing, and noticing the kind of the pattern variations. But so maybe you could talk a little bit about that. And also, I mean, just the distinction between the woven part and the beaded part, the proportion. And thinking about how, you know, a lot of them tended to kind of end in that there was a central division between the beads and the weaving. And I wonder, and then not. So just thinking about that kind of sense of space and movement and proportion, that kind of thing.
We should stand up. So we're less like talking with our backs. Thank you, Janice. That was a great question. So I tend to focus on ideas and less about the technical pragmatics when I talk about my work. Is it? No. Can you hear me? Okay. All right. So proportion. I am, despite my reputation for being a neurotic nightmare, I am very, very, very intuitive. I don't plan anything when I weave. Like I just start winding a warp. When I thread the loom, I'm using a specific construction, but I didn't draft anymore. I just sit down, start threading, and lay things out as I'm going. So the proportion is like when I feel like it's done, it's done. That's like scientific method right there. They look better with less weaving, with a larger amount of beading in proportion to the weaving. So that has been at the very not so gentle insistence of my gallery to accentuate that, which means they take longer. But it's the idea struck me as a way of like taking something that wasn't complete, and then that being the point of it being finished. Like it's moving from there. The beading itself, the motifs are responding to the motifs that you see in the textile very often. So I'll create diagonals and patterns in an improvisational manner. Like I don't have a drawing that I'm working off of. I'm responding to what I've done before. So every action becomes the scaffolding for the next action, which I find is a way to kind of go on a journey and find something that wasn't necessarily predictable.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Question. I have a question about the random what looks like warp threads that go across the woven portion and then go down to the beaded. Is that something that you add afterwards, or do you consciously leave out some warp threads because you're going to, you're going to use it that way? And then my other question is, when you're beading, is this laying flat? I mean, it's amazing. I'm thinking all those moves and all those warp ends and the length of what you're doing. I just want to have an idea of how you do it.
So the hanging threads that are coming out of the textile, those are all broken threads. For a very long time, an important component of my practice has been to kind of document the action that's happening. So if a thread breaks, I'll do something to acknowledge that. So the lengths of the repair threads are exaggerated, so that when it comes off of the loom, I'll bead those threads and I'll tie them together. And you can see a lot of it is breaking when I'm threading the loom, because it's very, very thin thread. Because I like to torture myself. And so they'll snap when I'm threading the loom, and then I have a lot of those threads to contend with. And it's a way of acknowledging the process. So anything that is outside of what would be designed or planned is something that happened during the process. And this harkens back to research I was doing in graduate school that was thinking about weaving as a performance, where it's a time-based medium that records itself. And so that's going with that. I don't lay them out flat. I weight them onto a table that hangs over and then hangs down. I used to do them on the floor and my back got really mad at me, so I don't do that anymore. But actually having them hanging down, the beads provide weight and tension, so it's actually easier, so I can see what I'm doing. Like when I was doing them on the floor, they were just like all over the place because they're just laying there. So it actually, in terms of getting a productive form, it's a more productive way of working.
I want to comment that your talk is another demonstration of how important art and politics are together, and that art is an essential expression of our community and our society. I want to thank you for your eloquence and your poetry in your presentation. I also would like to ask you, in an academic environment, you are head of an academic program and you are an assistant professor. You are, I'm assuming, on a tenure track. What is your view of how to achieve tenure, and how come you're head of a program as an assistant professor? Why aren't you an associate professor?
It's the way of the university system.
I know
would say that. I mean, they're brand new.
They're brand new.
So they have to be kind of go through the rigors.
So we're at Ken, unlike a big private art school where you have like 5 faculty getting paid sitting over 30 faculty that are not getting paid. I was one of those faculty for 10 years not getting paid, unofficially running a weaving program. That's why I'm not an associate professor, because academia is so it's probably a little too late to speak live, but hey, we did it. Here at Kent, we are, I'm a single person area, and that's why I'm the head of the program, because I'm the only full-time faculty. We have right now 3 adjuncts and 2 graduate teaching assistants, and then myself as the full-time tenure track individual. And how am I going to get tenure? By working very, 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 very hard.
How much longer do you have to go?
To be determined. So we're hoping to grow a little bit, but we can accept one graduate student a year. So we have 2 full-time graduate students, and then we also have a 3rd this year who is faculty in another program, so we can. She's not paying tuition, so she's able to participate. And then we teach 6 courses a semester, and that is about 12 students in each course. We have right now a small major population, but a very large population of textile minors, particularly the School of Fashion. So we're housed in the School of Art, but we have a lot of collaboration with the School of Fashion and textile minors. I don't know if you want to add to that.
No, I mean, that's absolutely right. I mean, and things are always evolving, but the courses, of course, textiles is the umbrella for everything, right? I mean, textiles rule. And you know, it contributes to the fields of architecture, the thinking, textile thinking, and just fashion. So we've always attracted students from all of these other areas. So John Paul is just kind of continuing to offer the courses that attract those students. And how many students come into our program and fall in love and having, you know, no idea what textiles is about before they get there, and then they realize, hey, you know, there's so many things you can do and you can think about, and obviously take it in many different directions depending on your interests, and they realize that this is for me. So you know, it's a matter of kind of getting those students through the door so that they can be turned on to what we know is kind of a wonderful medium.
I can attest to that. I took a weaving class with Janice, obviously, and to my right was a glass artist. To my left was a typography artist. Magically, the glass artist started weaving glass. And if you know Anderson from the gallery, his partner Aoife was in typography. And mysteriously, there's so much weaving in her work. And I will say, teaching fabrics here, I definitely am like, oh, go check out textiles. Don't leave me. You can like visit, and then you know, there's a few that say in front of higher ups in the department. Thank you so much. I changed my major to textiles. I'm like, so we do have another question.
I loved your presentation. Thank you. I found your color palettes, your color composition to be beautiful, harmonious, enchanting. But I guess at some point I thought, given your presentation, that there might be some elements of discord or disharmony within the color palette. I just was wondering if you had, especially given the presentation that preceded it, which had some kind of wake up moments. And just as a layperson, I just that was something that struck me.
So I'm thinking about the brightness of the color, the saturation of the color as being something that invokes its opposite. So rather than creating a form that is somber, I want a form that is as sparkling and bright and saturated as it can be. And through that, it summons a connotation of its opposite. And so part of what's happening is the threads that, like, there's an element of dilapidation and decay in the form itself, where the threads are sagging and hanging and all over the place. And so there's areas that are beaded and that are not beaded, and those become potential allusions to death. But the comparison that I make is like, if you listen to like disco that's really popular amongst queer people, it's all like upbeat and dancing and horribly depressing. And that's kind of what I'm reaching for with the work, that the form is contrapuntal to the content. And that's a very, very queer sensibility, but that's why the work is not like dark and somber. It's invoking its opposite, or trying to.
We do have some questions from afar. So.
They actually, we don't have questions from our virtual attendees, but before we finish, I wanted to read a couple of comments. Jenny Steinmack is one of our virtual members joining us. And for Janice, she said, fantastic presentation. Thanks for showing us the development of your work and how it fits with your students and their work. Thank you. And for John Paul, she said, thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts for this essential work and for your stubborn devotion to the loom. Apopio said.
Sure. Okay, so hi, I'm Steven. I work in public schools, and I just wanted to know from both of you, you notice a change in how many students are coming to you, and this is their first experience, or have they encountered fibers and textiles before they come here? Because I know that I had not when I entered college. I had like this little tiny thing, and now I teach all of my students to weave. So I want to know if that's like coming back into art education, or if it's going away, or what you notice as university people.
I'll just respond initially. Just Stephen, you're an anomaly because there still are so few feeder programs. I mean, I've talked about that in my entire history here, that, you know, it's hard to attract graduate students sometimes, although I think that's really changing. But the notion that there's not preparedness even in undergraduates, let alone in high school. And frankly, I will say that a lot of times the students that have come through the doors wanting to major in textiles from high school have been disillusioned by the program because they had a certain kind of narrow perspective on what was going to happen in their classes. And you know, no reflection on what you're doing, but a reflection on perception of what textiles is. And maybe that's because there aren't enough programs like yours that are more kind of academic. It's more, you know, what your parents are doing or whatever that you think then this is what's going to happen at a university, and that doesn't happen. So that's my perspective on it. It's just, you know, I welcomed any kind of student to come through the door, because a lot of times they are just so surprised by the potential and they grow from there.
Yeah, I would agree. There's not a lot of students that are coming out of high school programs that already have experience with textiles, but with what I see with a lot of students early on in their university training is whatever they come in with, they're exposed to new ideas and new thinking and new people, and that's going to change what they're focused on. Like, my favorite pastime is to steal someone from another area and like, please steal my students, and this kind of exchange. Like, it's because when you get someone who wanted to be a painter, and then they come and they sit at the loom and they discover they have an affinity for this, but they want to make visual imagery akin to painting, just with different materials. That's really exciting, rather than someone who like already came, knew how to do certain things, has preconceived notions, and is too stubborn to learn. So I think there's a more of an openness when someone comes from maybe an area over here and gets excited by something that they're introduced to at the college level. And so like, by all means, keep on teaching them how to weave so that they don't think it's not art, because that's an uphill battle.
Focus,
yeah.
Hi, I have a question, a very practical one. Your programs, these programs are so hands-on in the studio. What the heck did you do during the pandemic when no one could actually be here, I assume? How did you keep teaching this very hands-on, just these disciplines?
I'll answer first, just because I was here. John Paul was at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, but I was just telling Tina that it was an easy adaptation. Of course, textiles are, you know, we're resourceful, right? So we were able to adapt. I kind of knowing that the pandemic was going to happen, I had laser cut, you know, the digital frame looms cut for my class. I was teaching a pictorial class. I don't know if any of you did the went over to the Design Innovation Center yesterday and had your looms cut. So I had those cut. I mean, it was like, come on, guys, you got to cut these fast, 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 so that I can give them to the students. And they all took looms home from this class. And so it was kind of fun for them because they were using a new tool. We had used them in other classes, but not in this particular class. So I was able to just adapt the content, and, you know, we were working with that intersection of warp and weft. We were creating images in the pictorial class. So it was just a matter of scaling it down. Maybe I had to adapt some of the techniques that I was going to introduce, but it was great. And you know, we created a Facebook page and we created a community outside of the classroom which worked beautifully. And in the jacquard class, actually, I relied on the mill, and the students did proposals for projects, and then we actually sent them off to be woven, which was a miracle that the mill was still open, but it was. And so, you know, it was a totally different experience for them, but I think it was still rich in a way that I was excited about.
That was a very, very challenging time for being an educator. I was in the city of Chicago, which was one of the epicenters. So we went into an emergency shutdown. And so the immediate period after the proclamation of the pandemic was basically therapizing students. Like it was not a coming up with creative solutions. But I think like the following year was I refused to teach on campus for the year afterwards. Again, epicenter, mass transit, was very, very dangerous. So we would come to campus 1 or 2 sessions during the semester to acclimate students to equipment, and everything else was done remotely. And I think what that did, it's not a situation I ever want to go back to, but what that did was help us to figure out how to create kind of universal methods for education. So like now I use a lot of recorded videos as things that are either like, when I teach jacquard, I teach my entire technical curriculum through pre-recorded workshops, and we use their time together to focus on form and concept. And that's something that emerged out of the pandemic, but it was a lot of coming up with deliverables that could be digital that students can access on their own time. And it's made all of us better educators. I don't want to go through it again because it's learned enough, grew enough, but it's a lot of, and we're also dealing with a generation that's a bit different than prior generations, where they want to teach themselves and they want to co-teach one another. So there was a lot of figuring out how to foster opportunities for that. Zoom doesn't necessarily make it easy, but you know, you can figure things out.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much for being here. Can we give them a big round of applause?